my name is Animus of va.games. We're finally back in the lush forest zone at some unknown border around the Caspian Sea. The Mercs are representing the US faction, which means I get to pilot my beloved Viper once again. Sony's my co-pilot, of course, Jerry Hutch is my wingman, and Blake is left to hold together the ground game by himself. This game turns out very well for us. Jerry, Sony, and myself all finished this game with undefined kill-to-death ratios, which is just a mathematically charged way of saying that we had perfect games. Mathematics is beautiful, but unfortunately isn't well understood at a fundamental level by many people. The relevance to video games, and Battlefield in particular, is this relatively new cultural obsession with statistics. Stat worship. Now, to be sure, this fixation on statistics is certainly not new. Sports fans in particular have been keeping detailed records regarding the performance of their favorite players and teams for a very long time now, and industries of fantasy sports are contingent on the expectation that this trend will continue for a very long time yet to come. And there's every indication that it will. Statistics can be powerful tools when attempting to assess the performance of players or teams to find patterns and trends that can be used to make useful predictions about future data, and nobody could or should argue against that. However, unless you're familiar with the more complicated avenues of statistical analysis, you can overestimate the value of your findings and be drawn to erroneous conclusions. Battle log.
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Battlelog is the social networking service for Battlefield. Players can use it to engage in threaded discussions with other players, as well as track stats and access a wealth of other information. For a mathematician such as myself, this serves as an entertaining distraction during times when I can't access the game itself. However, many players use this to reinforce their preformed prejudices to undermine their peers and exalt themselves. The primary focal point of these discussions is usually the quotient of kills and deaths. Many players make the common but entirely incorrect assumption that the kill-to-death ratio is directly proportional to a player's overall ability, as if such a concept of overall ability could be measured or quantified in any objective or meaningful way in such a system as complicated as Battlefield in the first place. There are varying degrees of this bigotry, and its most extreme culprits will hyperextend this flawed reasoning to justify disregarding opinions that differ from their own. In many cases, intellectual disputes are solved in a medieval trial by combat, where one person's opinion must be right or at least have more credibility if their KD is higher, or if they have a higher level or rank, or if they have more hours, or if they win a one-on-one fight. It doesn't matter who's actually right, if there even exists an objective truth to the matter at all, but rather who has better stats. Unfortunately, those that use these stats to justify their own predetermined biases actually don't know the first thing about statistical analysis. Hank Green of SciShow highlighted this flaw of a layperson's intuitive understanding of statistics in a video he released last February called How to Predict the Odds of Anything. In it, he discusses Bayes' theorem, developed by Thomas Bayes in the 18th century, and how wildly inaccurate and overestimated even an otherwise smart person's intuition might be. I will leave a link to this video in the description below, and it's absolutely worth the 4.5 minutes it'll take you to watch it. For this video, I'll just be regurgitating his thought experiment briefly to highlight just one of the ways flawed reasoning leads to flawed results. Bear in mind that this is to say nothing of the constant and deliberate contamination of stats in the way of boosting and hacking. This scenario goes as follows, and please consider that these figures may be hypothetical for illustrative purposes only. Studies have shown that 1.4% of all women in their 40s have breast cancer. If a woman has breast cancer, a mammogram has a 75% chance of detecting it. But if she doesn't have cancer, that same mammogram has a 10% chance of returning a false positive. If a random woman in her 40s has a mammogram and it comes back positive, what are the chances that she actually has cancer? Feel free to take a moment, rewind this part of the video, or even pause it to take a second and consider this question. Now, you might be thinking that the answer is obviously 75%, but you'd be wrong. If instead you considered that the mammogram has a 10% chance of returning a false positive, so it then must have a 90% chance of returning a true positive, and thus there's a 90% chance that she has cancer, well, you'd be wrong again, and even more so than before. In fact, and I'll let Hank do the job of explaining exactly why this is, the odds of a woman who tests positive for cancer actually having cancer are really less than 10%. And this is extremely contrary to an intuitive assessment of the data, which is exactly why we should carefully consider what we think stats are telling us versus what they're actually telling us. In the majority of cases involving stat discussions in a forum like Battlelog, stats are incorrectly used by people who don't understand them to justify their biases and prejudices, and in the same breath, shirk responsibility for those same judgments by proclaiming, "It's the stats that say you're bad, not me." No stat says such a thing. The person says it, and they use the stats to try to justify it. Defenders of such biased and prejudiced positions are intellectually lazy, having neither the presence of mind to think critically about their own opinions, nor the curiosity to do so. The more savvy of these bigots often contend that players with higher kill-to-death ratios are more likely to win than those without. But this isn't true either, and it only takes a cursory understanding of mathematics and the better part of a half an hour to show why. The hypothesis is that a high kill-to-death ratio somehow correlates to success, or a higher win-to-loss ratio. I devised a simple experiment to test this. I sampled a random 100 players from the top 200 players of the leaderboard for the highest kill-to-death ratios from both Battlelog and BF3stats.com. I logged their kill-to-death ratio and their win-to-loss ratio into a Microsoft Excel worksheet, then calculated the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient to see how strongly related those two values actually are. Now for this video, I'll be leaving out the calculation itself, but I can and will provide links in the description to the process for those that are interested in conducting similar experiments to themselves. I can also provide the details and results of my own experiment to anyone that requests it. Just leave a comment or send me a private message and I'd be thrilled to oblige. The correlation coefficient is a value that ranges only from -1 to 1, with -1 being a strong negative correlation, 1 being a strong positive correlation, and 0 being no correlation at all. The closer the coefficient is to 0 on either side, the weaker the correlation between the two tested values. The result from my own calculation was approximately 0.19, which is a very weak positive correlation. Therefore, there is almost no correlation between a player's kill-to-death ratio and that player's ability to win games, which is evidence that the hypothesis is incorrect. The first example that I personally discovered of stats being used incorrectly to skew data was a commonly parroted statistic that about 70% of all motor vehicle accidents occur within 10 miles of a person's home. Well, duh, what did you expect? Most people do most of their driving within 10 miles from their home. People tend to live within 10 miles of their preferred grocery stores, laundromats, gas stations, and their jobs. Since every single trip that a person takes begins and ends at their home, it should be obvious to anyone with a pulse that the overwhelming majority of their traveling would be within a 10-mile radius from their home. And yet, this statistic has some people believing that they're more likely to get into a car accident just by virtue of them being closer in proximity to their own homes. Don't you see how fundamentally wrong this kind of thinking is? Battlefield is not a deathmatch arena shooter. While shooting a gun faster and with more accuracy than your opponent is certainly the most explicit thing that a player will do, it is not the only aspect of this game, and I would argue that it isn't even the most important aspect of this game. You can be helpful as a medic, as a repairman, a pilot, or just a distraction taking unguarded checkpoints. All that matters is that you do something. Do not be afraid of failure, and skill will eventually come with the experience. When I started with Battlefield, I was absolutely terrible. My aim was awful, I wasn't familiar with the maps of the weaponry, and I was completely clueless as to what the vehicles were and what they could do. I could never win a gunfight unless I caught the enemy by surprise, so my kills rarely reached double digits in a game, and my kill-to-death ratio was markedly less than 1. However, I consistently topped the leaderboard in conquest matches for score, as I usually had the most flags captured and the most spots per game. In fact, I've even been the #1 scoring player in a game without scoring a single kill. I would lag behind the enemy as they moved from flag to flag, spotting them and tracking their movements for my team and recapturing the flags that they took from us. I was not a good fighter, but I could make the argument that I was a good Battlefield player, as it was clear that my efforts were greatly contributing to the success of my team. Anyway, like this year, this game is coming to an end. I would love to hear how you feel about these matters in the comments down below, whether you agree with my opinions or not. Please, rate this video, leave a comment, share and favorite the video if you liked it. I've got a bit of a surprise coming up for the next video that I hope you'll enjoy, so subscribe if you'd like to see it. And hopefully, the next installment of my Helicopter Tactics series will be out before the new year. It's been a good 2014, and I'm grateful for the support that you've all shown me. Please, enjoy your holiday and the New Year celebrations. Be safe, be healthy, and as always, thanks for watching.
Report, advance taken.